bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Renzel, also known as Ricky Varandas, and we have another episode for you. And returning guest, somebody that I love listening to discuss what we're discussing today. Last time he was on was episode 35, believe it or not, in 2014. Gerrard Williams, author, filmmaker, investigative journalist, researcher. And if you haven't checked out his film, Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, and there's also a book of the same title, definitely check it out. He was also a part of Hunting Hitler, so you guys might know him from that. And when I had him on, this was before Hunting Hitler, and the idea of Hitler making it to Argentina seemed crazy, but this is a perfect example of no matter how often somebody tells you something is true, no matter if it's a historian, a teacher, whoever it may be, no matter how many people buy into that, you should still question it, because there's still a chance you could be lied to, and it could be based on lies, and that's important today. So I think that even though this podcast isn't about current events that are going on right now, you can definitely see some links and some similarities. World War II, Hitler, Nazi Germany, it's such a fascinating topic, and I feel like there's just endless amounts of things to discuss, and endless amounts of influences on what happened afterwards in the world, and different countries, different political parties, all different types of things that you just never run out of things to talk about. So remember to support Gerrard Williams, buy his book, check out his documentary on Amazon Prime if you're a member, or rent it, buy it, whatever you want to do, but either way, try to support his work. He also has a Facebook page. I'll put links in the show description to his movie, his Facebook page, his website, all that stuff, so you can connect with him if you would like. And also all my stuff. I have a Patreon page. If you want to support the show, please do. People who have, from the bottom of my heart, I truly, truly appreciate it. I'm trying to do my best to get out a bunch of episodes before, I guess, life opens up again and I get too busy with work and doing things, because right now you can't really do much in regards to going places or whatever it may be, going out to eat or going to soccer practice or whatever it may be with the kids. All that stuff is on hold, so it gives me a little bit more time to put these out. Work has been less busy, so it's really been a pleasure to be able to give you guys more and more episodes. Hopefully you haven't been sick of hearing my voice. I know some people probably have, but for the most part, I'm always amazed by the amount of positive feedback, the amount of people who contact me and tell me how much they love the show, and it's all super positive and motivating for me, and it sparks my willingness and my desire to want to continue doing this and take the time to put out these shows and book the guests and do all the work that's required to put out this show. So I can't thank you guys enough. I really, really can't. But remember, if you can't support the show on Patreon financially, share the show, tweet the show, review the show. Please do that. So do that. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Any guest that calls in using video like Gerrard did today, you can actually see Gerrard and I have the conversation. So any guest that's called in the past using video, even episode 35 when Gerrard called in, he used video, so you can actually see us back in 2014, have the discussion. You can see if we've aged well or not. But that's it. So enjoy the show, and hopefully I have many more around the corner, and keep spreading this stuff. As you know, a lot of conversations, a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube channels are being suppressed, they're being banned, or being flagged, all that stuff. So that little bit of effort of putting in, that you put in by sharing or tweeting or whatever it may be, or texting it to a friend, I think goes a long way. Word of mouth helps also. So that's it, guys. I love all of you. Hopefully you're staying safe. Hopefully you're staying sane. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. right? I mean, episode 35. I actually just looked it up because
God.
I was kind of just curious how long ago it was, and it was in 2014, sometime in July, and it was episode 35, and now I'm on episode almost, 200 more episodes than
Right.
that episode. But what's crazy is from then till now, what amazes me is how at that time, I remember when I had you on, and the idea of Hitler escaping from Germany and making it Argentina was such a new idea to so many people, and it was something that seemed absurd or like, how come I haven't heard of this and whatnot. And then, like years later, like now, it's becoming much more acceptable. I think your show, the Hunting Hitler, or you being on there, and that helped a lot because of the mainstream attention it got.
Sure. Hunters on Amazon has been, they end up on the last part of Hunters, not to run any spoilers, but, there's a sit down dinner with Hitler and Ava in Argentina.
Yeah.
So it has sort of crept into popular culture. It still hasn't crept into mainstream history. Unfortunately, there are still very few historians who I think are naturally a pretty lazy bunch, who still think that and it's not a theory, Ricky. I mean, the Grey Wolf, the book, details Hitler's escape and how it happened and everything else. And what I've learnt in the ensuing years has been even scarier. So, for me, it's just something that people need to look at, that people need to take a view on, because we've been lied to, and we've been lied to a level that I find ridiculously scary. And I was what nowadays, thanks to your current president, is called the mainstream media. I was a mainstream reporter for 30 odd years. I worked for some of the biggest names in news. BBC, Reuters, Sky News here. I've worked for CNN in the past. I've even worked for Fox briefly. But I've worked for some really big names. I've covered some big stories. Both Gulf Wars, Bosnia for 2.5 years, the genocide in Rwanda, the fall of the Soviet Union. I watched history in the last part of the 20th century, in the early part of the 21st. I was in Sri Lanka after the tsunami hit. And I would never have thought that something that is so entrenched in all our educations, that Adolf Hitler died in the bunker, committed suicide, end of war, could have been so untrue. Just really.
Isn't that the amazing thing is, no matter how many people believe something, no matter how many books it's written in, or how many times the story's told, it doesn't mean it's true. Like it boggles people's mind, but it's like it is this idea that if everybody thinks the same thing, then you assume like somebody must have done the research. Somebody must have, that's kind of our assumption. That's why a lot of times, I mean, even with the whole coronavirus thing, I've had, not to bring it up because I'm sure people have fatigue of the topic, but it is one of those things where, like, if everybody is shutting things down, if everybody is kind of reacting the same way, then everybody believes it must be as lethal as we're being told. But I think this story, and when a lot of historical stories are very similar, where it's just like, you have to do your own research and have.
There are two quotes, Ricky, that are important. One is from Goebbels, who said, "If you tell a lie loud enough and long enough, it becomes the truth." And the other one is from Churchill on the other side, who says, "History will be kind to me, I know, because I intend to write it." And both those things are dramatically true. History tells us that Hitler dies in the bunker, the Nazis are smashed. In fact, very soon on May the 8th, we'll be celebrating Victory in Europe Day, 75 years on. But the truth is so much darker. Hitler escaped, lived out his life in Argentina until probably at least 1962. Martin Bormann, the secretary of the NSDAP, the Nazi party, he escaped and lived out his life in South America until 1988. That's my latest information. But I'm pretty sure he was alive until the mid-70s. And they took with them hundreds of billions in today's money. It's the biggest crime in history. And they used that money to create what I'm now calling a secret Reich. something which I'd originally called the next book, which I'm currently writing, The Spider's Web, because that's the name of one of the organizations that helped fleeing Nazis escape at the end of World War II. But I'm now calling it Secret Reich because I'm blown away by the extent of what the Nazis were up to after World War II. And, you know, in a lot of ways, they completely misled the United States, the Western powers, and the Soviet Union. And they were helped to do this by people like Alan Dulles at the CIA. And, you know, the people who brought the whole Werner von Braun team over to run the NASA rocket program. And America was lied to. Americans were lied to. I mean, you know, you have Alan Dulles as supposedly, you know, the greatest chess master in the world. To me, he's the greatest traitor to the United States and the American way of life ever. I mean, he makes Benedict Arnold look like a bloody amateur, excuse my language, but, you know, I mean, and he spied on you guys for us, for the Brits. But we have a situation, Ricky, and I still haven't got it completely clear in my mind, that after World War II, the Nazis managed to convince the United States that the best intelligence organization in the world was the Nazi intelligence organization. And so Alan Dulles hired General Reinhard Gehlen and eventually 20,000 ex-SS and Wehrmacht intelligence officers to effectively run the US intelligence operation in Europe against the Soviet Union. So Gehlen, under, I'm pretty sure now, the orders of Martin Bormann, manages to persuade America that the Soviet Union is a huge threat. The Nazis run the Cold War. They have the matches, and they keep America so busy that in the late 40s, early 50s, even up until the 1960s, Germany can do what it likes because America is so scared of the red threat. When you put this into context with 20,000 intelligence officers, all blood oath Nazis working in West Germany, you have a secret army, which Der Spiegel, one of the biggest and best news magazines in Germany, has recently come out with, of 20,000 Nazi soldiers just waiting to be activated if they're needed. You then have the international organizations of Siemens, which British intelligence described as the overseas arm of the SS, and you have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, an immense amount of it faked, Ricky. I mean, they counterfeited the dollar at the end of World War II. You know, I'd only really been aware that they'd counterfeited the Soviet ruble and the British pound, and they counterfeited billions of British pounds and almost brought the British economy down. But no, they did the dollar as well. And so at the end of World War II, you've got Nazis running around the world with immense backup, brilliant communication systems, and enough money to do whatever they damn well liked. And they did.
Yeah. So for people who maybe, because I'm assuming and I'm hoping since episode 35, I have new listeners. So for new listeners who might have not listened to episode 35 back in 2014, how did you get involved in this? And also, I mean, we're talking about him getting away and stuff. I guess we'll start with a brief, I guess, overview on how you got caught up into this whole Hitler story, because it's become a huge focus of your work now, but obviously it wasn't at the time, and you didn't take it too seriously yourself at the time, right?
Yeah, not at all. I was in Argentina doing documentaries on a bunch of other subjects. The Dirty War, so that's the war against the Argentine left in the 70s. They killed 30,000 of their own people. Took a load of their children away and had them brought up by members of the judiciary, the police, the army, anybody they could put them with. I was doing a piece on the economic collapse in Argentina, and a rather silly piece on the Church of Maradona, which is a big thing in a football world, of Diego Maradona, you know, probably Argentina's most famous soccer player. And I was doing this with people like Al Jazeera, Channel 4 in this country. You can still see some of the stuff I did back then on Amazon, Blood Ties, if people want to go and have a look at it. And I came across this story that Adolf Hitler had escaped by submarine to Argentina. And I think I was getting a bit jaded at that stage by being a hard news journalist. And I had never done a conspiracy theory or a silly film ever in my career. So I thought I'd have a look at this and maybe do a silly conspiracy theory film about Hitler escaping from bunker in 1945 and living out his life in Argentina. And then I started to look at it. And about 3 or 4 weeks in, I started to go back and look at the Associated Press reports, the reports from Time, Newsweek, the BBC, and everything else. And they all said the same thing, that there had been no body found in the bunker. And then I looked further, and Stalin said that he'd escaped to Spain or Argentina. Marshal Zhukov, officer commanding Soviet troops in Berlin, said they had found no body that could be either Hitler's. Nobody even knew about Eva Braun at this stage. The BBC correspondent Thomas Cadet was embedded, as we now call it, with Soviet troops at the bunker. And Cadet files a great report saying, he's disappeared, he's gone, we have found nothing here. And I thought, but none of this rhymes with what I'd been told. So I started to look deeper and found details of the pilot who flew them out of Berlin and his statements reported by the press. And then back in Argentina, I started to discover eyewitnesses, people who'd actually met Hitler, people who'd met Hitler, or people who'd met people who had worked for Hitler at the time. I'd made lots of Argentine friends by that stage, and almost every one of them had a story to tell about Germans coming to Argentina post-World War II, or Croatian fascists, Ustashi, coming to Argentina after World War II. Then I started to look at it, and it seemed that the Nazis had put Perón into power in 1943, 44, had financed that whole right-wing revolution that brought the GOU, the officer class, into power in Argentina. That Evita Perón, Eva Perón, Blessed Eva, as she's known, Saint Evita effectively in Argentina, had been a Nazi agent since 1940. And there was a book by an Argentinian senator which detailed the checks that she'd been given by the Germans, who had paid for her apartment in Recoleta. And I stopped laughing, Ricky. I mean, I stopped laughing. I was gobsmacked. And you know, I had a relatively good reputation amongst my peers as an international journalist. And I talked to quite a lot of my peers, and they said, oh, you can't write this, Gerrard. People will just laugh at you. And yet I couldn't not write it. I mean, that's the point. You know, that's where I come from. That's my journalism background. If I know something needs to be told, if I know something is the truth, I have to do something about it. And also, you know, my dad was a combat soldier in World War II. Big anti-fascist, joined up at 18 when he should have been 21, lied about his age, wounded 3 times, fought all the way through North Africa, up through Italy. And if my father had known what I'd discovered, I think he'd wanted to pick up his Thompson submachine gun and go kill people. He'd have been that angry. I mean, the greatest generation, as it's called, both here and in the United States, were totally betrayed by a group of people who did it for money and power.
Now, people listening to this, I mean, the thing is, it is amazing when, even if you do your own research, you'll be amazed how there is zero evidence of this story that we've been told throughout all these years. There's no evidence. And like you said, if anything, if you do research, you'll probably run into Gerrard's work and other people's work saying the opposite, that there actually is more evidence that he didn't die there in a bunker. I think looking at the surface, like, we understand that Nazi Germany, Hitler, I mean, he was obviously, with his strategies and his philosophies, he seemed to be very well thought out. And to not have a escape plan, to me, like, I remember the first time I ran into your work and I'm like, this makes perfect effing sense. I'm like, because how would he not have a escape plan? I'm like, he seems to overthink and really look into every single detail of so many different things. I mean, they went after looking at the whole, they were looking for the Holy Grail, literally the Holy Grail. They were looking for UFOs. I mean, they were looking for all types of things that give them any type of advantage or any, I guess, I mean, they were interested in secret civilizations, all this stuff. And so, I mean, there's so many things that were thought out, and they really were. I mean, there was no rock that wasn't unturned.
I think that Hitler was so obsessed with his own belief in himself as pretty much a god, that he wasn't willing to accept from 1943 on, when they really were losing against the British and Americans in North Africa, and against the Soviets in Stalingrad. Hitler still thought his wonder weapons and his, Aryan shock troops and, would beat people militarily. Martin Bormann, who's the secretary of the party, often referred to as Hitler's secretary, which puts him in a tiny little hole in history. This man is the secretary of the party. Everybody's a member of the party. The party controls everything. All the Bormann individually controls all the Gauleiters. So he controls local government to a level that is minuscule in its control. Bormann knows it's over, and Bormann knows that he has to work out a way that the party can carry on. And he does very cleverly. He sets up 750 front companies around the world. He starts to do deals with Alan Dulles at OSS and various other people, including probably Wild Bill Donovan, the head of OSS. Bormann's known Dulles since they had an office in Berlin in the 1930s. Sullivan and Cromwell, I think it was, the law firm they worked for. And Bormann sets up a deal. You allow us to get away with, let's say, a quarter of what we've nicked, and in return, we'll give you our rocket scientists, and we'll give you back most of the art that we've looted from Europe, and we will go away quietly, and we'll just get on with it. And that was quite attractive to the Western powers, especially as it became more and more obvious, and this was a flame that was fanned by the Nazis post-war, that the Soviet Union was serious on their version of world domination. Why isn't any of this taught in school? There's been a 75-year-long disinformation program, Ricky. I mean, it's deliberate disinformation program. And, although I don't believe in New World Orders or lizard men or the Illuminati, I don't. I've got no proof of any of that. I've never come across it in my research. What I do have proof of is that there is a group of people out there, the people who ran the Bormann organization, people who are important in the military-industrial complex in the United States, which Eisenhower warned the US against many, many years ago. Kennedy warned you against the CIA, just before he gets murdered in Dallas. He says he's going to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He's dead 3 days later. And two of the men who sit on the Warren Commission, Alan Dulles and John J. McCloy, are two of the most key men in their involvement with the Nazis post-World War II. And I'm thinking, oh, come on, Gerrard, enough damn conspiracy theories. But everything leads to these ends. And although, I hate this idea that there's a shadow government in America. I hate that. I don't necessarily believe it. But what I do see is example of this military-industrial complex, partially run by the Nazis, Ricky. I mean, that's the thing. It's not just run by Americans. America brings the Nazis into the fold. The CIA recruits thousands of Nazis post-World War II and uses them to fight proxy wars in South America. So I have difficulty getting my head around it, Mr. Varandas. I really have difficulty getting my head around it. But what I do know is that there is, at some level, a military-industrial complex that still makes America spend trillions on defense, and yet doesn't spend enough on your homeless, your poor, your health, whatever. And, why? It's like somebody's trying to destroy you from within.
Well, yeah. So Operation Paperclip is something that people have heard, I think numerous of times in different conversations. But I mean, what people don't understand is like the guy who started our NASA program was a Nazi German. I mean, you can see stories and stories like this over and over again of people who should have been tried as a war criminal or and instead we're just kind of look past that and we're like, well, let's just forget all that and we'll
Up until 5 years ago, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was going to name its first deep space ship the Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun was a lieutenant colonel in the SS, responsible for the deaths of over 30,000 slave laborers in his plants in Germany, the deaths of 4,000 to 5,000 civilians in London, and many more in Holland with his V1 and V2 weapons. But even that story, paperclip, and the way in which all those scientists came to America is sold to us as if Patton's Third Army just found them. Whereas the truth is that a British unit brought them to General Patton, and that British unit was under the command of Ian Fleming, the man who wrote the James Bond novels. This gets even crazier, right? And to have gone and got all those key scientists from their homes in Germany and at Peenemünde and brought them to Third Army, they must have been told where they lived. It's part of the deal. They were told where they lived, they were taken to the Americans, and NASA was born. Operation Paperclip put almost, 10,000 scientists into America. Every single one of those, a member of the Nazi Party. Now, under American law, under President Truman, if you had been a member of the Nazi Party, you weren't even allowed in the States.
Now, you referred to a few times about some of these Nazis coming to the U.S. How much of their influence do you think they had on the U.S. foreign policy, U.S. I mean, because obviously all the South American coups that were going on, Guatemala, Chile, yeah.
I mean, Kissinger's place in this is something that history really needs to look at. And Eleanor Dulles, who was Alan Dulles' sister and who ran the German desk at State until 1962, her place, you will not find anywhere in biographies of Eleanor Dulles the remarks of the American ambassador in Berlin, where Dulles was living in the 1930s, who describes her as a confirmed Hitlerite. But no, that's been whitewashed out of all Dulles family records, but no, not out of the American ambassador's writings at the time. How much influence did the Nazis have? I think their main concern was rebuilding Germany. But if there were things that America needed to do, they were willing to help those things along. So yes, Nazi influence in American foreign policy is huge probably from 55 onwards. I think it's everything from Korea through Vietnam, through the Asian dominoes principle and things like that. The School of the Americas all has links back to senior Nazis involved with American intelligence at the time. And it's cost the United States. I don't want people to walk away from this, Ricky, thinking I'm anti-American, because the last thing in the world is anti-American. I don't like American imperialism. That's just one of those things. I don't like the military-industrial complex that exists in America. But I'm a Superman fan. I was brought up on Green Lantern. I've got so many American buddies. That I love America. I love the ideas of the founding fathers. I love the ideas that the British and the French brought to the American Revolution. But that's been perverted horribly by the people who rule you.
Yeah. Well, I love. I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. I like Iron Maiden. I like Jaguars, but I don't like a lot of what the British government does. So I'm with you. I like a lot of, I'm with you 100%. I mean, it doesn't, I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, and I'm glad you clarified it, because I think a lot of times people do confuse you having an issue with the policy of a government of a country, and then thinking that is also a reflection of how you feel about the people or their culture. And when it's not even connected at all. I mean, I live in America. I love American people. I mean, I was born in Portugal. I came here as a young kid. My parents are still, we speak Portuguese at home. We still have a lot of European cultures that I grew up still was a huge part of my upbringing. But I consider myself as American as I do Portuguese, because I grew up in this country. It's full of immigrants. So I mean, even though
America is a land of immigrants.
Exactly, yeah,
that's the great thing. I mean, the land of the free, for goodness sake. And that doesn't necessarily mean the land of libertarians and open carry, in my opinion. But people will have their own choices. But it's horrible for me to see. I mean, Britain is bad enough. The imperial actions of Great Britain around the world are some of the most disgusting things ever, and yet we're never taught that. The royal family still held in immense respect in this country. I don't understand why, because it's simply hundreds of years ago their great-great-great-great-grandfather had a bigger battle axe than mine. That's what it comes down to. Is they killed, raped, and robbed their way to the throne, as people do. So I don't understand these things, and I think that there's a huge disinformation program about British operations in imperial times, and there's a huge disinformation about American operations post World War II. And every day I learn more and more about this. And it's funny, some people were actually quite loud about it. People like Walter Winchell, people like Eisenhower, people like the Kennedys, and even people like the Police Gazette, the National Police Gazette, this yellow rag newspaper or magazine that was around in the 50s and 60s. And I've just got a copy of a book called Hitler is Alive by the National Police Gazette. A lot of it's very funny, Nazis in Antarctica, all that stuff. But there are 8 to 10 stories there published and shown to the American people about Hitler being alive in Argentina. And I have corroborative reports from 3 other sources of every single one of those 10 articles in the National Police Gazette. And to me, that's amazing. Where the hell did they get the information from? And, they were pumping it out. Huge circulation newspaper. But it's been, it's showed up, it may as well be Mad Magazine, as far as anybody's concerned. And yet there are at least 10 stories that they ran, which I have corroboration of other witnesses and other information that shows they were telling the truth. That's been doing my head in the last couple of days completely.
Yeah, it is wild. I mean, you brought up the School of Americas. I mean, even that part of American history people don't know. I mean, taxpayers' money went to this school that basically was teaching people how to, be
murder.
Murder.
Murder. It's torture and murder. I mean, the school is still there. It has a, quotes, proud military.
Georgia? Where was it? It was in Georgia.
Yeah. It has proud military history and reputation, but it doesn't, not in South America. You talk to anybody, Argentinian, Bolivian, Paraguayan, anybody who's an intellectual or, what might be referred to as left-leaning, which means they're quite nice people, as opposed to the fascists who ran them for 30 years. And they all talk about the School of Americas and Kissinger and the money that was spent by America to, stave off the communist threat? In fact, so much of that money just went into the drug trade. The cocaine problem in America is created by the American military and their support of fascist dictators in Argentina. I mean, it's madness, complete madness.
Oh yeah, I mean, the cocaine was coming from, was coming in from the CIA.
Bolivia.
Bring it in, yeah, Bolivia. It was coming in from Nicaragua. It was coming in from all. I mean, I had Rick Ross on my show some years ago, who was he was getting all this cocaine super cheap, became basically the biggest drug dealer in the U.S. Didn't know why he was getting it so pure and so cheap, and only after when he went to prison that Gary Webb, the journalist who the movie Kill the Messenger is about, he ends up finding out that there's this link between the cocaine that Rick Ross was selling and the CIA cocaine that was coming in.
And all that is linked back again on the ground in South America to Nazi operations. And that's the scary thing. There's another layer there.
Yeah, that's wild. But see, doesn't it? I know you briefly just said that before. You said that you don't really believe in the shadow government, but isn't this all kind of evidence that there is a shadow government? I mean, this is all kind of that there are people behind the scenes that have I guess, agendas that we're not aware of doing. Because we all, I mean, you look at even if we take it to like the basic understanding of lobbying, right? Like we know there's lobbyists. We know that they have huge. I mean, I've had Jack Abramoff on the show. I mean, lobbyists obviously have huge influence on policy. I mean, language will be put in a bill and they'll be voting for it and they don't even know what the language is. They just know a lobbyist said, hey, put this in there. So there's all this outside influence. Then you look at like Henry Kissinger.
Secret government, Rick. I mean, my ideas on this are still formulating. I mean, I'd be a liar if I said I know the answer to everything. I mean, I just don't. And I never expect to. I'll be dead before the answer comes out. And, all the interesting files in America, in France, in Germany, and in the United Kingdom are all stamped another 50 years top secret about the areas that I'm interested in, which is post-World War II. So it'll be 100 years before, and then they probably won't be released. They just probably won't be released. Historians will only be fed bits and pieces. If there's a secret state, I'm not sure about America. I'm not really going to comment on the secret state in America. There is a military-industrial complex in America that has a huge influence on the way in which your government acts on its policy. That's real. Internationally, there is no Illuminati, but there is Bilderberg. And Bilderberg is where people of the same ideas and same right-minded concepts get together and do business. Iraq and Dick Cheney, I mean, is part of that for me. And, the way Tony Blair was conned into supporting weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and so was Bush conned into believing that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's easy enough to say, but damn it, it was all about oil. So, and yet Bilderberg was started by the Prince of the Netherlands, who was an SS officer. The guy who married Queen Beatrice, and they own huge amounts of land in Argentina. It just trying to track this down, Ricky. That's why originally this was called the Spider's Web. There are pieces of this which I look at and I think that can't be right. That goes against everything I've ever done, everything I've ever reported on, everything I've ever read. And I'm a well-read person, Ricky, and I think I'm a well-read person. I've read widely, let's put it that way. And I now come across these things and I think, how can that be right? We were on Hunting Hitler. We went up to where Eichmann lived in Tucumán province for a while. And he was there working for an SS operation called Capri, which was heavily involved in hydroelectric power for Perón's government. Now, you need hydroelectric power if you're going to build nukes. You need serious amounts of electricity. And Eichmann was sending back core samples from mining in the mountains back to Buenos Aires all the time. And he was looking for uranium. He wasn't there building hydroelectric dams. Another senior Nazi in Argentina I've recently discovered, in fact, this week, Ludolfo von Albensleben, one of Himmler's aide-de-camps, and a man responsible for the deaths of probably 30,000 Poles when the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939. Von Albensleben applied for permits to the Perón government to search for uranium. Now, I know the Nazis had uranium refining operations in Argentina post-war, and there are Reuters reports of 2 explosions on the Argentine-Chilean border, small nuclear explosions in the 1950s. Did the Nazis have a nuclear card they were willing to use to get to the table with the big boys post-war? To me, it now looks like that's exactly what happened. And they were politically much more influential. They're all dead. The war's over. How can any of this be real? And yet it is. It's real.
Well, wasn't there it was Operation Epsilon or something like that, or about it was like some Nazi nuclear program that they had. Some people believe that they might have had some nuclear capability or whatnot.
I think the Nazis had nuclear capability at the end of World War II. I think they probably used a low-yield battlefield weapon at Kursk against the Russians, and that they tested a couple, one at a place called Erfurt and another one in the Harz Mountains. not nukes like we imagine nukes being, used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but low-level battlefield. I don't know, I'm no physicist, Ricky, but to me they sound like neutron weapons, neutron bombs, which is part of the West's and the Russians' arsenal nowadays. But I'm pretty sure they had nuclear capability at the end of World War II. And there's a fascinating story about a submarine surrendering, Nazi submarine surrendering up at Plymouth in the United States at the end of World War II, U-235 or 234. I'll get this wrong because on board was a bunch of uranium, and the scale number for uranium is U-235. So it's either U-234 is the U-boat and U-235 is the uranium. And Oppenheimer is on the dock at Plymouth waiting for this sub to dock because America doesn't have enough fissile material to build the second bomb.
Wow.
There's been amazing books written on this by great investigative American journalists, reporters, authors. And it seems that, as part of the deal at the end of World War II, Martin Bormann managed to give America the nuclear material to build the second bomb they dropped on Nagasaki. And that was part of the deal to let them get away. And when trying to join the dots, Ricky, it's driving me insane.
That is crazy. Well, that's why I love the fact that you're an investigative journalist and you're not, I guess you don't have a degree in history or whatnot, because this is the difference between the two, is that a historian is married to an idea because that's what makes them the expert. It's like, okay, these are the stories I know inside and out. I know these names, I know these dates, I know these events. This is how it happened. And I basically make a living off telling you all this knowledge that's set in stone. An investigative journalist is like, well, I'm still looking for answers. I'm still, searching for answers, and you're not married to any ideas. Where that's what I love, because like as things get uncovered, you're willing to change your outlook or your perspective or what. And historians aren't like that.
Yeah, I can't think of the number of times I've been on. I won't say shows like yours because I think yours is a very individual, great show, but the number of times I've been on radio, podcast, television, whatever, and people have said, but the historians all say you're completely wrong. And I say, well, let them prove me wrong. I'd love it. I can go back to having a glass of whiskey in the garden and thinking about girls. I mean, whatever. I can go and write science fiction, but prove me wrong. Tell me that this stuff is, I don't make this stuff up in my bedroom doing the internet. I've been to Argentina 18 times. 3 series of Hunting Hitler allowed me to go to places that I'd not been before. Not always successfully. It was a bit too much telly for me, a bit too much reality television and not enough serious journalism. But, that's the way TV has tended to go nowadays. They missed out on opportunities on that show, which I think would have been earth-shattering.
Would you mind expanding on that? Like what exactly?
I'll give you one example. We're on a boat in Bariloche on Lake Nahuelhapi, one of the most beautiful places in the world. It looks like Bavaria. There's a beautiful island which just happens to be home to one of the biggest nuclear operations in the world in the 1950s. Hitler lives down the end of the lake. And we're on the boat with a local historian who's a lawyer, a very nice guy. And I'm supposed to be amazed at the Saracen Tower, which is this big tower that overlooks the lake and pretty much the guard tower, so you can't access a great part of the lake. I've been there 3 times before, but I've still got to look surprised, so it's fine. So I'm chatting away with my newly found friend, the lawyer, and he shows me a couple of things. The first one is a book, and I recognize the book. It's the autobiography of a pilot called Hans Ulrich Rudel, who was Hitler's favorite pilot, the most decorated Luftwaffe officer of World War II, went on to try and restart the Nazi Party in Germany in the 1950s, close friend of Perron's, one-legged but used to ski a lot in Bariloche. And his autobiography was published in Argentina, in Germany in 1947, and then sent back to Berlin. And I said, yeah, it's Hans Ulrich Rudel's autobiography. And he said, yeah, well done. And he said, open the cover, and inside it's "To my dearest of comrades, Hans Ulrich Rudel, whenever 1947." And I said, oh, that's interesting. Where did you get that from? He said, yeah, that's interesting. And then he hands me a small, I suppose it's about 2 inches by 2 inches cloth bag, the sort of thing you'd put a piece of jewelry in. And he says, have a look at that. So I open it up and I take out an Iron Cross, first class, World War One Iron Cross, first class. Now, I've seen hundreds of Iron Crosses in Argentina, the majority of them fake, but quite a few, yes, Nazi Iron Crosses, first class, World War Two. But I haven't seen an Iron Cross, first class, World War One. I mean, they're not that rare in Britain, in Europe, but I mean, they're pretty rare in Argentina. And I say, okay, so it's an Iron Cross, first class, from World War One. He said, yes. And the client I got this from tells me that her father was given it by Adolf Hitler in Bariloche in the 1960s for his services to Hitler's security here. This guy's a lawyer. He's no idiot. And Adolf Hitler only ever wears one decoration. He wears two. One is his gold Nazi party badge, which he hands to Magda Goebbels late in the war. And the other one is his Iron Cross First Class, which he won as a German soldier in World War One. And Hitler only ever wore that as a decoration. And so I go and talk to the director, and I say, mate, honestly, even if we don't believe this, and I said, and at the time I'm quite shaky because I'm thinking, am I really holding Adolf Hitler's World War One Iron Cross that he got for bravery? I can't be. This is just madness. And yet, the daughter of the SS officer who my lawyer represented swore that that was the story her father told her. And I'd have thought that would have been a classic sort of History Channel hunting Hitler moment. No, we're too busy. And then the lawyer tells me that there's a cache, a buried tin trunk with weapons and documents and medals and everything else in the area. And the crew's on the day off the next day. So we don't go looking for it. We got everything there. We've got ground penetrating radar. We've got flipping high-end metal detectors. We've got GPS material that can pinpoint a dropped Coke can. I mean, but we don't go after it. But
yeah, and Tim Kennedy. I mean, I'm a MMA fan, so it was cool to see Tim Kennedy there. I mean, it's
Captain America is my buddy. We didn't think we'd get on Series 1. We come from a very different world. Tim's a special forces sniper. He's got over 100 kills to his name in combat zones. He's a really tough MMA fighter. Tim is also a PhD. He's married to an accountant. Tim is the only way, and I call him Captain America. I call him Cap when we still talk. Hey, Cap, how are you doing? He's got two lovely little kids and a couple of girls from previous relationships. I'm very proud to say TK is a friend of mine, but we are massively different. Tim is an American samurai. That's what he is. I mean, he wouldn't have been out of place in the Templars. He is an intellectual warrior who sees violence as a part of his world. Luckily, never towards me, because he doesn't scare the hell out of me, actually. And I think Tim realized that there's a phrase from the American Civil War where combat veterans would recognize each other by saying they had seen the elephant. So if you'd seen the elephant, you were part of that unspoken camaraderie that only people who've seen combat will ever be. Now, I've never been a soldier, but I've been cruise missiled by you guys in Baghdad. I've been mortared in Bosnia. I've been chased by machete-wielding Hutus in the jungles of Rwanda, and stuck on a minefield in Latvia, a Soviet minefield in Latvia when the Russian troops pulled out. And I think Tim and I recognize that there's something of us both having seen the elephant in different ways. But yeah, I'm proud to say TK is a friend of mine.
Yeah, it was cool to have all the different personalities and different backgrounds together. And then it was cool to see how you guys all got along too, because I think it was a great, I guess, example of how no matter how different we are, we can all come together and you realize that you have
former head of the U.S. Marshals Manhunting Division, Lenny. Lenny is one of the funniest, most hardworking, brilliant Italian Americans I've ever met in my life. I mean, half his family turned up in Rome when we were shooting there. Half his Italian family turned up in Rome. So I'm getting kissed and hugged by all these DePauls. We go out to, one of the best restaurants that his family knows in Rome. And yet, you put Lenny in a situation where he's got to interrogate somebody or interview somebody. Switches. And, he's seriously professional. And I think what we liked, distinctly with Tim and Len anyway, is that the three of us recognized the experience and the seriousness of what we had to bring to the party. And the mix worked well. As I say, I would have liked to have done things a little bit different in some ways, but it's TV. And, what it does is it tells a story that I'm not a fervent believer, Ricky, because I don't believe in anything. What I am is somebody who needs to see the who, why, what, where, and when of the story. That's where I come from. That's where I was trained, as a journalist. And Tim would look at things from a very military, very cold, calculating point of view. And Lenny would get in their heads of these criminals, because that's what we're talking about, the biggest criminal gang in history who got away with it. And sorry, Rick, I go on. I know.
No, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off. Go continue.
The interesting thing also is, to me, the Nazis and the organization, call it the Spider's Web, the Spinny, the Odessa, whatever, but I will always call it the Bormann organization after World War II. At some stage in the 1960s, mid-1970s, maybe, these guys went legit. It's like a mafia family going legit. It's like the bloody Godfather, where the Corleones suddenly need to get out of the crime syndicate business and go legit. So they buy hotels in Vegas and they turn them into criminal organizations. And that's what's happened here is that the Nazis went legit. I mean, they realized in the 50s, when all the information came out about the Holocaust and how they industrially murdered almost 11 million people across Europe, 6 million Jews for their faith and 5 million people for whatever other reasons. They got in the way. They were Slavs, they were homosexual, they were socialists, whatever. The Nazis would kill you for as quickly as looking at you. But they realized the men in power post-war in the Bormann organization, people like Gestapo Muller, Heinrich Muller, who lived in Argentina until the 1980s. They realized you could never march behind the swastika again, completely flawed brand. They couldn't put on their Hugo Boss designed uniforms and their jackboots, and they couldn't be anti-Semitic. And when that sea change happened, because that, completely unacceptable, it'd be like suddenly finding out Coca-Cola was made from virgin's blood. If you can imagine how Coke sales would just collapse. It isn't, by the way. But, that's what it was like. That was the sea change for them. And they went legit. Legit in some ways. But illegitimate in other ways, because they still control so much of industry, power, and politics.
Today, you mean?
Completely.
And you mean, but are they... So when you say they, are you referring to people from, because even isn't the royal family, you go back far enough, aren't they also
German Greeks?
Yeah,
Greco-Germans. We haven't had a British royal for centuries and centuries. Not since they last killed my Welsh prince, and that was in 1143 or something. The last real Prince of Wales. Yeah, I mean, the family's important in this as well. The Nazi families, their children and their grandchildren. My dad was a combat soldier in World War II, so I'm 61. So if you can imagine Nazis being combat soldiers in World War II, their kids are in their 60s, and the important ones are, the ones who wield power still with major industrial companies around the world. And major political influence around the world as well. And their children now, the grandchildren of the Nazis, are the ones who are clean. The money's all been laundered. They still have huge amounts of influence. And although it's not a question of racial superiority anymore, I think that went out the window in 1956, really. The Aryan nation, it just became a ridiculous concept that they couldn't make work because they couldn't make work and make money out of it anymore. They're still out there. I mean, the money didn't disappear. The shareholdings, I will single them out. The shareholdings in Volkswagen, Siemens, Krupp, AEG, Ford, the Ford Motor Company. I mean, that's a great example of a great American industrial industry. Henry Ford was the worst anti-Semitic Nazi that America has ever seen. It was his writings that influenced Hitler to write Mein Kampf. Hitler awarded Henry Ford the highest possible Nazi medal that can be given to an international civilian. The Ford Motor Company made a third of the trucks that the German army used in World War II, driving to fight young Americans, Canadians, and Brits on Ford-made trucks heading towards the same blasted battlefield. I mean, how is that right?
Well, IBM also, they're
ran the Holocaust. They put the counting machines into places like Auschwitz and Dachau.
Scott Bush had he got in trouble for trading with the enemy act because
he only just got away with not being put into prison. And it's things like major American oil companies put the price of gasoline up before D-Day. They put it up 30%. And the American government paid it because what else could they do? So, I'm not sure whether I'm ever going to come up with the answer, Ricky. I hope that doesn't disappoint you. It disappoints me. I'd like this to be really black and white, straightforward and simple. But every time I look and think 2 and 2 makes 4, it turns out to be 7. And so it's still driving me nuts, man.
I mean, I think when people hear us talk about this, I mean, one thing is, I don't think people understood or understand how many Germans there are in Argentina and in other places, Nazi Germans that escaped there, and places in Argentina that literally everybody speaks German. Everybody speaks German, right? I mean it'd be the equivalent of like
the official history says 9,000 Nazis escaped at the end of World War II. It's closer to 100,000. Not just Germans, Austrians, Norwegians, European fascists of every color, shape, and size, Croatians, Italians, because remember, Italy was a major fascist country. So at least 100,000. And what even disgusts me, probably as you Portuguese family, Ricky, you're probably brought up Catholic, I was.
Yeah.
What really depresses me is the role of the Catholic Church, aspects of the Catholic Church, in helping these murdering scum escape. And then you find out that the International Committee for the Red Cross was handing out identification papers in new names to most of these Nazi scum. And you think, good God, it's the church. It's the Red Cross. How could that even be allowed to happen? I'm hoping that by the end of the year, I'll have the book in some kind of shape and it'll get published for next year. With this crazy coronavirus lockdown going on at the moment, of course, my publishers are in New York, so nothing really is happening there. And again, I was due to do a series based on the book, The Secret Reich, on television, but that's all being held down too at the moment. So what I've decided to do, Ricky, is that via Facebook, and anybody who wants to can find me on Facebook, I am accessible. I'm going to produce a video cast probably every 2 weeks, putting this information out, and being ready that when the world does come back to whatever normal the world comes back to be able to publish this information. I almost stopped, Ricky, when this coronavirus thing hit. I think everybody with any sense went into a bit of shock about it. And what it could be, what it couldn't be, what it might be, what it isn't, who knows, right? At the moment.
Yeah, I think it was the uncertainty, right? That's causing the anxiety. It's the unknowing.
Huge amounts of fear. So I'm locked down on my own in my little cottage in Oxfordshire. So I haven't, touched another human being for 7 weeks. I miss my kids, my grown-up kids, but hey, I still miss them. And my brothers and my sisters and my nieces and nephews, but we'll get through this. But there was a time when I thought, is my work important? Is it going to matter when we all walk out into the bright sunlight of a post-coronavirus 21st century? And I still haven't completely answered that question. Does it matter? But I think it does. I think it's important that things like the things I'm exposing never happen again. There's a Spanish phrase which Argentines use after the dirty war in Argentina, which was terrible, and of course sponsored by Kissinger. You can listen to the audio of the files of the meetings that happened in Washington, which gave the go-ahead to the junta in Argentina. And the phrase in Argentina is nunca más, never again. And if my work, I'm not trying to be all sort of, hey, my work's so important. I'm not trying to be self-important here. But if my work and the work of people like me exposing the truth of what happened after World War II means that some things will never again happen, okay, well, that's fine. That's fine. Maybe I am doing the right thing. Still not sure.
Yeah, well, no, I think it is important because I think a lot of times, when something is happening now, then it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it. But when you can look at a historical event and you can show examples of, okay, look, we've been lied to. We've proven that you can. Joseph Goebbels was right, and then the techniques of Edward Bernays and understanding propaganda and all this stuff. It holds true that if you repeat something enough times, people just accept it as truth, even if there's no evidence to back it. And it's a great example. I think it's hopefully wakes people up into the idea of like, okay, we can all, there's a quote I love, and I always say it on this podcast because I think it's so important. It's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And it's so important because I think once people are tricked, it's hard to convince them that like the world as they know it might be a lie, or the world as they see it might be a lie. And we need to constantly ask questions. And when you hear about these stories of like, holy crap, like something that we thought was set in stone, there was evidence, we all believed it. There's all these people who were all on board believing this story as being historical fact. If that can be a lie, then what can't be a lie? And that's why I think these stories are so important, because it's going to help people realize like, okay, maybe I should be questioning many more things than I thought. Even things like that I think are completely accepted by just about everybody. And
yes,
so,
yes. I mean, I'm trained that way. I mean, I'm trained to ask questions of what I see in front of me, and so it's become part of my very soul, Ricky. I mean, I can. Even if I wanted to stop, I couldn't. I mean, that's the stupid thing about this. But you're right. I mean, we need to question a lot more of what is being done in our name. In Britain at the moment, we're clapping all our National Health Service workers. We have a wonderful free-for-all National Health Service, thank God for it. And the people on the front line are incredibly brave. But the people who are clapping are the people who voted for the Conservative government that cut the hell out of it, that pays our nurses minimum wage. They now need to think about what they've done and the impact of what they do. They need to question why they do these things. And that's just one example. You can't go through your whole life questioning things. I think, basically human beings are decent. We have this thing where, most human beings will go out of their way to help another human being. Most human beings will love their family and, form firm bonds with their friends and love them and do things for them. And there's a decency amongst the general population that I still find wonderful. But what we need to realize is that there is a lack of decency at some of the highest levels of our society, both in government and in industry, that doesn't give a damn. Doesn't give a damn about me, you, anybody. All they care about is making money and solidifying their power. That's all they care about. Nothing, whether they present themselves as Christians or family members or family men, they don't care. All they care about is themselves. And when they meet like-minded people, there's your secret state, Ricky. There's your Illuminati. There's your Bilderberg. Because they recognize in these other creatures that they don't care either. So they're easier to deal with. So they can do business with them. And there's that old mafia thing is, I'll kill you for free because you're my friend. And don't worry, it's only business. And then you get shot in the head. Well, there are people out there like that, sadly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and I've always had this internal battle about, when you and the other thing is like World War II and the Nazi Germany is so fascinating. I mean, you look at like you briefly brought up the hunters. I mean, that idea of Germans coming to the U.S., having some secret plan of like maybe staying in power underneath the surface and still having some influence. The Man in the High Castle is another kind of one that's interesting that's influenced by World War II. I mean, it's so fascinating because there's so, like you said, there's so many layers to it. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down. It blows my mind because it's like it's endless. It seems like it's one of those times in history that you can never get sick of researching because it's endless. It never ends. But we've talked about it a little bit. But do you think like they were motivated by ideology? Because we're bringing up money and power, or were they using ideology as a way to control people? Because I mean, obviously, like Hitler initially, you talked about his medals. He was very proud of him serving, in the First War. He almost died. He was proud of that. He seemed very nationalistic, and nationalism was a big motivator.
An amazingly nationalistic German who was born in Austria.
Yeah.
Did they use ideology to gain power? Very much so.
What is the question? Like, do you think they also believed it as much as they put it out to be, or was it a way of controlling the public and getting it in power?
There were elements definitely within the Nazi Party who believed it, who believed in the superiority of the Aryan race and the fact that anybody who wasn't Aryan, Slavs, Jews, whatever, were Untermensch, under beings that weren't real humans. So they had their T4 execution plan for anybody who had Down syndrome, anybody who had multiple sclerosis, anybody who was a cripple, and yet, Goebbels was a cripple. One leg was 3 inches shorter than the other. I mean, you look at Hitler and Goering and Himmler, they're hardly blue-eyed, blonde master race creatures, and yet they convinced an intelligent country like Germany that their ideas were right. But I mean, it's an intelligent country like Germany. But this week I was looking at a U.S. Army documentary that was put together after World War II for servicemen not to fraternize in Germany. And it's thorough. It goes back to Prussia and Bismarck and how society was organized under Bismarck, and how it was organized under the Kaiser, the emperor, and then the Nazis were able to latch on to this organization where everybody had a block committee, everybody had a block leader, everybody had their place in life. A postman had a place in life, a milkman had a place in life, a lawyer had a place in society, policemen did. It wasn't as free and easy as most Western societies still are. And the Nazis were able to use the almost militarization of German society to ram their ideology down their throats. I mean, people will try and defend the Germans and say, only 33% voted for him. Yeah, but everybody knew what was going on in Germany during the late 30s and the 40s. Everybody knew their Jewish neighbors were disappearing. Everybody.
But isn't it, to be the devil's advocate, because you ever watch that documentary Hellstorm?
No, I don't think so.
It's based on a book, I believe, of the same title, but it's from the perspective. I mean, one thing that they kind of highlight is how many like farmers and just people who were really not political and really not, were just the casualties, the people who weren't even involved, who weren't, and that does happen, right? In war, like there's people who,
Sure, there always are. There always are. But if you're talking about urban populations, Munich, Frankfurt, Berlin, Dresden, you name any large city, these people knew what was going on. The Wannsee conference run by Heydrich, which set up the final solution, I think there were 24 lawyers there. Most of them in uniform, SD, SA, or SD or Gestapo or SS. 24 lawyers. These are people who've been to university. These are people who listen to Bach in their off time. Heydrich was a great violinist, and yet, one of the most cruel Nazi dictators of Bohemian Moravia, in the Czech part of the Nazi Empire. And after the war, there was virtually no denazification. Denazification is a complete lie. That they put away all the industrialists. 3 years later, they let them all out. I think we executed maybe 20 senior Nazis at the end of World War II, no more than that. We let most of the generals go. I mean, when NATO was formed, there was a former Nazi general in charge of NATO, for God's sake. How soon we forget.
And isn't that one of the conspiracy theories, right? That they have some influence on NATO, the UN, like they still have. There's still that ideology. It's
definitely a conspiracy theory that the whole of the European Union is a Nazi idea. The Nazis had the idea, but they weren't the only ones who had the idea. And I'm still a confirmed European. I think Brexit is just insanity. But again, we're going to see those structures have huge strains on them. Germany and France haven't done as much for the poor nations in Europe as they could have under the current circumstances, and that's going to put a huge pressure on the European Union. I look at this from overseas. I watch America with huge interest and a great deal of sadness. I mean, if you guys lose as many people as you have, it's just atrocious. I've got friends in most of those major cities, New York especially. But then you hear the governor of California referring to California as a nation state. And you see Cuomo in New York, basically completely at odds with the Trump administration. You see governors getting together, and I don't see a United States of America. I mean, the pressures on that are going to be huge, huge. And in some ways, it's the coronavirus that has caused all this. But I just wonder sometimes, before all this happened, whether the Nazis actually won World War II, and they've just waited 75 years to say, hey, we won. But again, as I said, I'm still working it out, Ricky. I'm still working it all out.
Well, some historians have said, if World War I never happened or didn't end the way it ended, that maybe World War II would have never happened, because we talked about the nationalism. And I think a lot of that was probably motivated by, Germany was, they were, after World War I, they were very poor. They were,
Germany was treated abysmally after World War I. It is, World War I does sow the seeds for the rise of nationalism in Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, and sows the seeds for World War II. But these were imperial times, and empires need to be finished. That there was still almost that Roman approach to conquering civilization by the West. And it's whatever happens now. We are not going to go back to and we're not going to go back to the way it was. Politics will change, global alliances will change, and somebody in 75 years' time will be sitting on a podcast, Ricky, and you'll probably still be there as an AI, still running it, and they'll be bringing up exactly these questions, like how we behaved at a time of plague across the world will have an impact on the next century, in the same way that World War I had an impact on that century, and World War II had an impact, still has an impact on our century. These are momentous times, and I wish I wasn't living through them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I look at it
I'm
is like,
glad to be alive.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we could definitely be living through, I guess, worse times, right? I mean, in different parts of the world, I mean, where we are lucky to be where we are and whatnot. I mean, things could always be worse. But in regards, see, the thing about Nazi Germany is that, and I say Nazi Germany because I don't, I know that people in Germany now have a very, I mean, that's the other thing. What's your opinion on that? Is it a PR thing that like for
Oh, Germany is a decent, human, moral, grown-up nation, and
how
there
do they
is
get
no
part of history?
there is no sign of any aspect. There is a far right wing in Germany. There is in France. I mean, we don't tend to have it in Britain for some reason, although it did rear its ugly head during Brexit. There will always be a far right wing of ill-educated nutters who hate for the sake of it in every nation on earth. But I don't think Germany is built on Nazi gold, Nazi industry, and Nazi politics, but it isn't Nazi in any way, shape, or form. Um, no,
So,
it's a modern liberal democracy, and thank God for it. We don't need anything like that at the heart of Europe.
so you think Germany, looking back at that part of history, there's more people that probably are ashamed of it than people who, are, how it is weird because I mean,
As a nation, you sometimes have to grow up and recognize that the sins of the fathers cannot be visited on the children. And I'm not sure what the complete answer to that is. Everybody thinks rule Britannia, that Britain was great. You talk to Indians about British rule in India. I mean, I have a Maasai son, a Kenyan Maasai son, and my adopted son, who's a politician now in Kenya. He's the congressman for Narok County in the Maasai land. Wonderful guy, brilliant guy, very Kennedy-esque for an African politician, and I'm proud to have him as one of my family. And the challenges that he's about to face in a country that has no intensive care beds, no medical system, which is intensely and inherently corrupt, are very different to the ones that anybody else I know is going to face. And he's going to have to come up with some leadership qualities that are going to make a real difference. But Ladama, my son, once said to me that he was going to write to the British government and insist that they paid reparations for the way in which they treated Kenya and the Maasai people. And I said, that's brilliant, Ladama, you've got to do it. And he's American educated, American graduate. I said, you've got to do it, because when you do it, can you give me the paperwork? And he said, what will you do with it, Gerrard? I said, I'm going to write to the Romans, because, God, they screwed my country up. How far back in history do you have to go? I mean, I covered the Balkan Wars, and the great British reporter, Martin Bell of the BBC, and Martin was asked, what the hell is wrong with this region? And Bell just turned around and said, too much history. So sometimes you have to let it go. What you don't have to let go is the way that people within living memory behave towards other people.
Yeah. Well, you look at like the Vietnam, obviously, I meet somebody from Vietnam now. I hope they don't hate me because I grew up in America. They understand that wasn't a reflection of how I feel or what I thought, or, and sometimes that's the thing, like how much, even Nazi Germany. So many times I'm watching documentaries and I'm researching, and it's funny because this was just brought up on my last podcast. Del Bigtree, who was just on my last podcast, he was talking about how he's talked to friends and he's mentioned before, and people debate with him, but he believes that if any of us, if we grew up in Germany at that time, could end up being a part of the Nazi party, because it really.
I think it's important, Ricky, to try and separate out, even though there is a national guilt that Germans needed to have. It's important to separate out Nazis. I mean, people often don't know historically that the SS division defending the bunker at the end of World War II wasn't German. They were Norwegians, French, Belgian. They were European Nazis defending Hitler at the end of World War II. The SS had buggered off by that stage. They were looking for somewhere to surrender, preferably to Americans or Brits, not to the French, and definitely not to the Russians. But I mean, We forget that there was a huge number of Belgians fought for the Germans during World War II. Huge number of Dutch fought for them in World War II. There was the Spanish division, the Blue Division at Stalingrad. This was, it was a German disease, but fascism was a disease that had spread throughout Europe. Through Italy, Portugal, you had your own fascists. Spain, you had Franco. Greece had the colonels. Italy had Mussolini. Fascism was not just a German thing, but Germany, the Nazis, let's stop calling it Germany, but the Nazis refined it. And it's that we must never allow to happen again. And if by telling the facts as I discover them goes even a tiny percentage of the way for something like that never to happen again, and for people to question the activities of their politicians, I'll have done a job that was worthwhile doing. I hope.
So like, we talked about how initially they were very much motivated by nationalism and what happened in World War I. And, and I do agree. I mean, I like I said, I could put myself in a German's position during, living through post World War I and then prior World War II. I could see myself being so angry, yeah, just upset and angry at the world about, look at all these innocent people that are, look at the way we're treated, look at the way, look at our country, people dying and nobody's helping us. And yeah, I mean, did they? Obviously, you can make the argument that, like, that they were the bad guys during World War I, but no country's people should all have to suffer like that after post war. And I could see
it becomes very fertile ground. I mean, but yet we never learn lessons from history. After World War II and the way in which the Allied powers dealt with Germany, the three powers, France, Britain, and the US, dealt with Germany. They didn't destroy the officer class. They didn't destroy the political class. There were vague attempts at denazification, but basically the Gauleiters, the local mayors, went back to work. The officer class took off their Hugo Boss designed uniforms, put on their Hugo Boss designed suits, and went back to work in industry. There was no destruction of the middle class, the intellectuals in Germany. If you look at Iraq, for instance, and how America acted in Iraq post-Gulf War II, they completely alienated the Ba'ath Party, completely alienated Saddam's army, destroyed any political ground work at all, and in the end created a huge, horrible mess for your young men and women to cope with on the ground. But I mean, I can't think of the man's name now who was in charge in Iraq, but he had learned nothing from the way in which America had handled Germany post-war. And post-World War II, the Allies didn't make the same mistakes as the Allies did post-World War I. So there wasn't the fertile ground for Nazism, nationalism, racism to breed in Germany. What happened in Iraq was, with that destruction of the intellectual middle class, fundamentalism reared its ugly head again. And you can see that it's almost exactly what happened in Germany after World War I. Suddenly hate is a currency, because what other choice do you have? These people have invaded my country and destroyed it, and they left no social governmental situation for the Iraqis to run with. So the mullahs take over, and they're just awful people, as bad as the Nazis. But you have to be careful how you treat a defeated nation, because you can leave fertile ground for the most horrific things to happen. And you're right, Ricky, that's what happened in Germany after World War I.
Well, you see it now. You want to talk about people not learning from history. Look at I mean, it seems like over and over again when people struggle or people are having a hard time, they end up blaming some other group of people. And in America, you see it with Mexicans. It's like, they're taking our jobs or this and that. It's like a lot of your problems, if not all your problems, have nothing to do with Mexicans. It has to do with your own government. It has to do with, so many other
the situation here now, okay, in that we have a lot of our crops rotting in the fields in Britain, because we used to have immigrant workers coming in from Europe, Romanians, Bulgarians, who would come and do all the hard work, pick all the crops, stay for 3 months and go home. They can't do that now because of coronavirus. So we're short of something like 140,000 farm laborers. So the government has run a bit of a campaign saying, okay, could we Brits go and a lot of people are unemployed here now. Could we go and pick the fruit in the fields? I think they've managed to hire 12. And yet these immigrant workers are the people that were berated during our Brexit negotiations as the people who are destroying the fabric of British society, coming over here, taking our benefits, using our health system. Thank God for them being in the health system. 20% of our health system is run by immigrants. 20% of our doctors and nurses are not British, probably even more. So yeah, that's worked out really well. Let's hate the immigrants. You're Mexicans, our Romanian fruit pickers. Just ridiculous.
It is. I think when people just look for someone to blame, and I think it was when Germany was struggling, it was easy to blame the Jewish people and blame other people, and they were just. I mean, I think, like you said, they were angry, they were upset, and they needed the same thing. I mean, look at September 11th. I mean, you want to talk about capitalizing on the public's emotions. I mean, September 11th happened. People are worked up, they're angry, they're emotional. And you could just well, let's blame Iraq and Afghanistan. And we just it didn't even have any
guys who did it were all Saudi Arabian, pretty much.
Yeah, they were.
Saudi Arabia is one of Britain and the United States' biggest allies. We sell them more weapons than any other country in the world. This is the country that developed the people who flew the aircraft into the towers.
Yeah.
And yet you went to war in Iraq.
And they're Saudi funded. I mean, the 28 pages that were redacted prove that, and yet the Obama administration didn't let the families sue the government or have any legal action towards the Saudi government, because, like we said, it has nothing to do with justice, has nothing to do with. I mean, politicians. It doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter what color they wear or tie they blue or red tie or it doesn't matter what they say. Like they're motivated by money and power, and it doesn't all this ideology like we were discussing a lot of times they don't believe it. It's just used to get people to back whatever cause that they want.
Yeah, it's used to keep them in power and them to make money.
But the Aryan race, like, so how, because that wasn't initially, that wasn't something that, I mean, did he always have that intriguement with those type of philosophies? Like, where did that come from?
It came out of Henry Ford. Hitler's writings in Mein Kampf come out of Henry Ford's work on eugenics and the creation
in the U.S. People forget that before Hitler, you had Edward Bernays, that was writing propaganda in the U.S. You had the eugenics movement in the U.S. before World War II.
I mean, we had a very similar thing in Britain and very similar thing in France as well. Eugenics was the pop culture of a certain part of society in the 1900s and up to the 20s. It sort of faded away in most of Western society. It did not fade away in Germany. But a lot of the writings that were cherry-picked by the Nazis, and especially Hitler in Mein Kampf, did come out of the eugenics movement in the United States and did come out of Henry Ford, which is why he was so popular with Hitler. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they celebrate pagan holidays also, right? They were Himmler was big in the pagan holidays and all that occult stuff.
But when I'm going through a lot of the stuff that I research, you suddenly realize how much propaganda we've been fed. Okay, Hitler was a vegetarian. No, he wasn't. He just ate more vegetables than meat. His favorite meat was baby pigeon, roasted, and he quite liked to liver sausage occasionally, but he didn't eat a lot of meat, but he wasn't vegetarian. But in the 1940s, to be a vegetarian wasn't to be a real man. Can you imagine that now? I mean, you and I probably got vegan friends, vegetarian friends. I know I have, and I don't think of them being as any less masculine or feminine. But in the 1930s, it was like, in the 1950s and 60s, you called a homosexual a queer, or a puff, or bloody hell. Ugh. I mean, thank God LGBT things have moved on a huge amount. But Hitler's always referred to as carpet chewing to make the idea he's a carpet chewing madman. Carpet chewing comes from the German phrase of walking up and down a carpet, back and forth while you're thinking, literally eating the carpet.
I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah. So, but in our propaganda terms, he's a vegetarian carpet munching madman. Madman, yes, but we tried to make it out that. I mean, I'm not even sure. There's this whole thing about Hitler being monotesticular, in only having one testicle. And that may be real or not. But then there was a huge soldiers' song during World War II, which was Hitler has only got one ball, the other is in the Albert Hall. His mother, the dirty bugger, cut it off when he was just small. And, that was propaganda. I mean, the idea that a man can only have one testicle, be a vegetarian, and munch his carpets. You make him small. And, it's a good idea if you're fighting somebody. You've got to make them look ridiculous.
Well, some people also said he was bisexual, and
I mean, yeah, and into
evidence of that, right?
Well, I don't know. I've just been reading William Stevenson's book about the Bormann organization, and he goes into salacious detail about Hitler's sexual habits.
But even if he was, who cares, right? I mean, what? Okay, I mean, if I find out some corrupt person or some, in this case, if Hitler was gay, bisexual, straight, I mean, I guess that, why would that change my opinion out of him, right?
I think it only would if he was holding himself up as the ultimate of the Christian family man.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so, if he was the ultimate of the Christian family man, yet was knowingly had slept with prostitutes, had divorced second wives.
Are you referring to American politicians?
I'm not referring to any orange-faced person, Ricky.
It's amazing how every time there's a politician who gets caught with something like that, it always happens to be some Republican. And there's
conservatives in this country as well. I mean, it's amazing how many vehemently anti-gay campaigners turn out to be gay. I mean, shut up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not what I'm here. Not what I'm here to talk about.
But it
just blows my mind. It just blows my mind.
It does. So for people listening, because I've taken up a lot of your time.
It's been a pleasure, Ricky. It's always good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, you too. It's been too long. But it's for people who are listening who want to connect with you, keep up with your work, get your documentary. Well, it's a docudrama, right?
Yeah, but I'm also happy to give people an e-copy of Grey Wolf, the original book, an electronic copy. So if people hit me up on Facebook, I'm Gerrard Williams. There's only one of me that you'll see with various Nazi stuff around him. But I think I'm Gerrard Williams 5 on Facebook. I do interact with people who talk to me. I think it's important to do that. And if people are on Facebook, they can go and look at the Spider's Web, which is an area where some of my new research is being put out. And as I say, there'll be a video cast very soon where I'll be talking on a weekly basis about things that I'm not able to go and talk about on the ground in Germany, Argentina, Bolivia. So I'll have to be doing it from the safety of my own front room. But even so, there will be more information coming out. Facebook is probably the best way to find me at the moment.
And Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, I believe that's still on Amazon Prime. Is that available?
Yeah, the docudrama is available on Amazon Prime. The book, I'm not sure if it's still in print, in hard copy, but it may well be out there. But as I say, I'm happy to give anybody an e-copy now. These are strange times, and I've never been in this for the money, Ricky. If I'd been in this for the money, I'd be talking about lizards running the world or something crazy. But
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's you see it over and over again. The best musicians, the best journalists, authors. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Nikola Tesla. It doesn't matter what you're referring to. They're motivated by their work. They're motivated by some passion, some seeking of truth, some seeking of knowledge, whatever it may be. But they're not. It's not a money motivation. And I think that that usually, in America, especially when you're talking about a capitalistic or mostly we're not a fully capitalistic country. I tell people that all the time. Like, remember, we do have postal service and police officers, firemen. That's all paid by taxpayers. And but they like to believe that everything good in the world is because of the money motivation, but it isn't. You look at the best work in the world, and a lot of times big corporations end up buying little companies that end up that are motivated. They're just motivated by their work, and then big corporations have the resources to buy it, and then say it's their.
I've done my bit. I've put both kids through private school. I've earned good money at various times in my life. I did own a house before all this grey wolf stuff happened, and then I ended up losing it. I don't need that much money, but I do need to continue doing what I do, because otherwise there'd be a real problem up here, and I don't want that.
Yeah. No, I think happiness and fulfillment and purpose is much more important than any money. I'm with you. I mean, I do this podcast. I tell people all the time, I'm like, hey, if just share the show. It's open source. Post it where you want. Tweet it where you want. I'm like, it's about getting these conversations out there. It's about hopefully sparking thought and spreading this. And to me, that's way more important. If one day I could, obviously, if all of us, if we could make money doing what we love, of course, why wouldn't we? But it's never our full motivation, or we wouldn't be doing this for as long as we have.
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, I was very glad to be on issue 35, and it's been a real pleasure to be back with you, Rick. Real pleasure.
Hey, thanks, Gerrard. We'll keep in touch. Hopefully, we'll talk again in the future, especially when your new work starts developing a little more, and we can talk about that once it's ready. And stay safe and stay sane. That's, I think, both are very important right now.
And you and all your listeners and followers, Ricky. Good luck to you all.
Hey, thanks, Gerrard. Take care.
And you, bud. Bye-bye.